This is part 2 of a tribute to the late Alexander John McKellen, better known as Australia's favourite wartime radio star, Al Royal. Melbourne was where Alexander McKellen was born in 1915 and where, in the early years of the war, he established himself as one of Australia's most naturally talented singers of popular ballads under the stage name of Al Royal. But success in Melbourne was one thing. An up-and-coming talent in those days needed to be tested against the best, and the best of the entertainment business was in Sydney.
Was the thing that we went as far as we could in Melbourne, that the biggest show there was in radio was Bob Gibson's band down at Palm Grove with Star Night, and that was a Monday night show. And Bob, what a magnificent fellow, still fit as a fiddle and still as keen as mustard, and doing great shows. And as a matter of fact, we're still connected in a lot of shows between Sydney and Melbourne at present. And so Al went up there. At that stage there was the Palmolive Colgate show. Was the Colgate Palmolive was the thing. That was the top show in Australia.
We got a contract to come to Colgate Palmolive. They had a big unit then with the Jack Davy shows for 2GB, and it was the main show was called Calling the Stars, and Jack Davy, of course, was a star. But anybody who was a star was always invited to appear on the show. We had some wonderful names in those days. And some of the English people that came, or Australians that went to England, and they'd come back to Australia to get away from the bombs, and also because there wasn't enough food or jobs in England, they were glad to come back to Australia to relieve the pressure, I suppose. And anyway, anybody who was anybody sang at Colgate Palmolive Jack Davy shows, and of course Al was quite a big star in those days with that unit.
Bernice Lynch and Dennis Farrington discussing the powerful influence of Sydney on the entertainment scene during the war years. And that's where Al Royal headed to try his luck. But by now there was a Mrs. Al Royal, Melbourne vocalist Betty Ingram.
Well, it was after we got married, and we just moved into a new flat, and we decided to go to Sydney and try our luck. So we sold some of our furniture to get some money, and went through with some people that we knew that had a charcoal burner on their car. And I got a job in a tobacco factory to tide us over until we got established a bit. And Al did some work, just casual work at first, and then Arrival, that was with Jack Davy, and Arrival firm offered him a contract, and Al wanted to stay with Jack Davy, so he made out that the others wanted him more and were willing to give him a contract, and so Jack Davy signed him up there and then.
As they go dancing around to the rhythm of starlight, dark silhouettes in the shadows of midnight, playing a part in this beautiful rhapsody. Leaves in the trees cast a magical splendor, each silhouette seems to whisper surrender, as they romance in a mythical symphony. While the world dreams, tiny moonbeams gaily dance and hum the theme of a song. Like a cello, sweet and mellow, they go singing and swinging along. All through the night, running helter and skelter, until the dawn, when they fade to their shelter, ending the dance, serenade of the silhouette. While the world dreams, tiny moonbeams gaily dance and hum the theme of a song. Like a cello, sweet and mellow, they go singing and swinging along. All through the night, running helter and skelter, until the dawn, when they fade to their shelter, ending the dance, serenade of the silhouette.
Crooner Al Royal writes from Sydney, where he says the weather and the Sydney producers, hey Al, is agreeing with him, and everything in the Royal Garden is lovely. Al is yet another local lad who had to go to another state to gain recognition, and the fact that he's been such an overwhelming success in the harbour city says little for the judgment of Melbourne producers. In his letter, Al refers to those days and thanks us for the encouragement we gave him. That's our pleasure, Al. Glad you had the grit to see it right out.
What was it about Sydney that attracted the cream of Australia's entertainment talent? Well, I caught up with a show business legend over coffee and cakes at the Bondi Pavilion in Sydney, Hal Lashwood.
And it was during about 1940, beginning of 1941, when the biggest variety shows on radio commenced, the Colgate Palmolive programs. Now, to give you an idea of how popular they were, they would have they were all at 8 o'clock at night. Monday night at 8 o'clock, half an hour. Tuesday night, which was Calling the Stars, 1 hour. Wednesday night, the Cashmere Bouquet Show, but all Colgate Palmolive unit, 3/4 of an hour. Friday night, Colgate Cavalcade. That was Mo and Jack Davey, myself, and Situation Comedy. So on every weeknight except Thursday night, that was reserved for the amateur hour, which was done by the opposition. Lever Brothers were the sponsors of that. So they were really very big programs. You know, at one stage we had, in the Colgate Palmolive unit, we had an orchestra of 65, and we had our own writers, a team of writers, our own arrangers, musical arrangers. For instance, I can remember one of our arrangers was Henry Cripps, who later on became Sir Henry Cripps, and he was the conductor of the South Australian Symphony Orchestra. And then, of course, all the top people, they just put under contract the top people. And, of course, one of them, I think he started in about 1941, he was a dear friend of mine, and a beautiful voice, was Al Royal. And I could sit and listen to Al. I used to sit during rehearsals, and I always felt he had like a velvety, smooth, silken voice, wonderful voice, and a great fellow as well.
Underappreciated in Melbourne.
Well, yes. Well, there was very little going on in Melbourne. It was always that way. I don't know why it was, because we had people who would come to Sydney from Melbourne and from Adelaide within the Colgate Palmolive unit. We had a lot of people, including Al, and then there was Terry Howard and Jack Burgess and Alan Code and Rex Dorr. They were all from Adelaide. We had people coming from all states for that. That was the Colgate Palmolive show. But the ABC kept the flag flying in Melbourne a little, with dramas and a variety show now and again. But Sydney was the centre for radio. But Al Al Royal, you know, I suppose if I was to remember, apart from his voice and his talent generally, the one thing I remember most about Al was his, I can hear him laugh. He was what we'd call a wonderful audience. He'd laugh. He used to love to laugh. You know, had a great sense of humour on not only things that were said, but things that he'd see. But I can see him now with he had that dark auburn-coloured hair and a massive, thick hair, and laugh at rehearsals, and we'd go out and we'd have lunch together, and then at night sometimes there'd be different people would entertain us. We'd go to parties, but he was really a very humble man, because he was the #1 singer at the time in Australia of that type of song, you know, what we used to call pop songs in those days.
This is just a fling, yet you say our love means everything. Do you mean what you are saying, or is this a little game you're playing? My heart tells me I will cry again. Lips that kiss like yours could lie again. If I'm fool enough to see this through, will I be sorry if I do? Should I believe my heart or you?
Gordon Warren tune from the 20th Century Fox movie Sweet Rosie O'Grady from George Trevere and his dance orchestra with vocal by Al Royal. This is part 2 of a 3-part tribute to Australia's favourite wartime recording artist, Al Royal, and it continues after this break.
A hot champion for Australian music is crooner Al Royal, who makes his bow into Variety Fair on Monday evening, March 12th at 7:20 on 3AR. Al says he has thoroughly enjoyed cutting discs of local compositions with George Trevere's orchestra and thinks the songs ought to sell overseas. He received a letter of thanks from the Melbourne composers for his recording of Blue Dusk. He has also recorded No Use and At the End of the Trail.
While in Sydney, Al Royal made a number of recordings with the George Trevere Orchestra, and it's a measure of his talent that he was able to achieve widespread popularity with songs that were not what we would call today standards. Blue Dusk is one such song.
Dusk, when the shadows are falling, when a nightingale's calling, I'll be waiting for you. Blue dusk, when a weary day's ending, in their cheery way stars send their sweetest light for wandering through. At blue dusk, I'll be longing to hold you, to caress and enfold you tenderly in my arms. And so, beloved, whether waking or sleeping, keep my heart in your keeping till the soft blue dusk. And enfold you tenderly in my arms. And so, beloved, whether waking or sleeping, keep my heart in your keeping till the soft blue dusk.
Blue Dusk, the Brady and Edwards composition emanating from Melbourne, which turned out to be one of Al Royal's biggest hits with the George Trevere Orchestra. That was one of a series of recordings made in Sydney during the war years, and it's through these recordings that Al Royal's talent as a singer can, in retrospect, be assessed. Bernice Lynch remembers him as being different in style from the other Australian crooners.
And in the days when everybody sang on the beat and was strictly, corny really, he had a lovely laid-back style, more like the American way of singing. And of course he was very popular. The girls used to flock around him, as I remember,
Yeah.
He was a nice-looking boy. He had natural red hair, and he used to smoke a pipe sometimes, which made him look very masculine and appealing,
Well, he was a great fan of Bing Crosby's and Perry Como. And but I think Bing was foremost in his mind. And but he really didn't copy anybody. He really didn't try to copy anybody.
Betty McKellen also remembers a side of Al Royal's life his adoring public didn't see.
He wasn't very strong. He had slight polio when he was younger, and he had left him. Well, he wasn't lame, but he wasn't over strong, and consequently he couldn't. He wasn't accepted in the army, not even as a pen pusher, which he became later on. When he, came out of music, he became a clerk. But so he did his bit by entertaining the troops later on. when he joined the Jack Davy shows, they used to go around the camps and do Calling the Stars and the other show. Had a name. Anyway, they went to various, camps, and Rise and Shine, that's right, that's the one. And Jack Davy used to have quizzes and things, and then they'd have different artists on.
Al was in hospital there in Sydney.
Yes, he had a collapse one time. He discovered he had a duodenal ulcer. But, and then he had to go in for another slight operation. Wasn't over serious, but he wasn't sickly, he was just not strong.
Until my baby comes home. No, sir, no, nothing. As long as baby must roam, I promised her I'd wait for her till even Hades thrown. I'm lonesome, heaven knows, but what I said still goes. No love, no nothing, and that's a promise I'll keep. No fun with no one, I'm getting plenty of sleep. My heart's on strike, and though it's like an empty honeycomb, no love, no sir, no nothing till my baby comes home.
Another of the hit records made by Al Royal in the 40s, the great Robin and Warren mood song of the war years, No Love, No Nothing, from the Fox film The Girl He Left Behind Him. And then, at the peak of his popularity, he dropped out of sight. What became of Mr. and Mrs. Al Royal will be the subject of the third and final program in this series, paying tribute to the late Al Royal.